Rick smirked. I'm not serving you. He shoved the groceries aside, eyes full of disdain. The store fell silent. No one spoke. No one helped. Amara held his gaze, then turned and walked away. A week later, she stood in front of him again, but not as a customer. She slid a document onto the counter, her voice calm and firm. You're fired. Rick's face went pale. What happened next left everyone speechless. But let's start from the beginning. Evening. A supermarket in a quiet Atlanta neighborhood. Amara Williams, a young black woman in her late 20s, stood in line at the register, holding a basket filled with groceries. Her work clothes still smelled of coffee. She had just finished a long shift at the small cafe where she worked. She sighed, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, exhausted but relieved to be almost done for the day. Behind the register stood a middle-aged man with graying hair, his name tag reading Rick Hudson. His eyes flicked over Amara as she placed her items on the conveyor belt. He scanned a few things before abruptly stopping, his expression shifting to one of disdain. You sure you can afford all this? Rick sneered, eyeing her worn-out uniform and the small bill in her hand. Amara blinked in shock, thinking she had misheard. Excuse me? Rick crossed his arms. People like you come in here all the time, trying to pull something. I ain't about to waste my time. He shoved her groceries aside. I'm not taking your money. Take your stuff somewhere else. A cold silence fell over the register. The elderly woman behind Amara gasped. A mother in line pulled her child closer. A younger man in a business suit looked between them, but said nothing. Amara's hands tightened around the cash in her fingers, her breath shallow with disbelief. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, her pulse pounding in her ears. You're refusing to sell me groceries? She asked, her voice shaking but steady. Rick smirked. That's right. Her jaw clenched. This wasn't the first time she had experienced discrimination, but this level of blatant disrespect, in front of so many people, was something else. She looked around, searching for an ally, but no one spoke up. The humiliation burned. With a sharp inhale, she forced herself to stay calm. Fine. She scooped up her purse, turned on her heel, and walked out. But as she stepped into the cold night air, she made a silent vow. This isn't over. Amara's fingers tightened around her phone as she stared at the floor. The humiliation from earlier still burned in her chest, each second replaying in her mind. The sneer on Rick's face, the judgment in his voice, the way no one had stepped in. The injustice of it all settled like a weight in her gut. She had spent years working herself to the bone, taking on double shifts, scraping together every cent to build a better future. And yet, to him, she was nothing. Her jaw clenched as she scrolled through her phone, hovering over the corporate number for the supermarket chain. A formal complaint? A social media post? Would it even matter? How many stories like hers had been buried, ignored, dismissed? Then, her phone buzzed. A familiar name lit up the screen. Mr. Lawson. She took a breath and answered. Hey, Mr. Lawson. Amara. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. His voice carried its usual warmth, but there was something else. Excitement. I came across something that immediately made me think of you. She sat up, gripping the phone tighter. What is it? There's an investment group looking for a strong candidate to take over a struggling business. It's in a prime location, but the current owner is sinking fast. They need someone sharp, someone ambitious, someone who knows what it takes to run a business and turn it around. Amara's breath hitched. And you thought of me? Of course I did. You've got the drive, the work ethic. I've watched you juggle jobs, balance budgets, and problem solve under pressure. If you can convince them you're the right person for the job, they're willing to fund the acquisition. A rush of adrenaline shot through her veins. She had spent years dreaming of opening her own cafe, a place where people felt welcomed, valued, a place that stood for everything she hadn't felt in that supermarket. This wasn't just a business opportunity. This was power. The power to create something real, to prove that people like her belonged in spaces where they were so often pushed aside. Her fingers tightened around the phone as her mind raced. A week ago, she had felt helpless. Now, she had a chance. Not just for justice, but for something far greater. Lawson's voice cut through her thoughts. "So, do you want me to set up the meeting?" Amara exhaled slowly, her lips curving into a determined smile. "Yes," she said. "Set it up." 1 week later, Amara walked into the same supermarket. Only this time, she wasn't a customer. She had spent days in negotiations, proving her business acumen, convincing the investors that she was the right person for the deal. And now, she was the new owner of the store. Rick Hudson had no idea what was coming. She found him at the register, scanning items with his usual bored expression. He barely glanced at her as she approached. "What do you want?" Amara folded her arms. "I want you to pack up your things." Rick scoffed. "What?" She pulled out a sleek folder, placing it on the counter. "This store has a new owner, me, and you're fired." Rick's face turned red. "You... what?" He grabbed the folder and flipped through the papers, his hands shaking as he realized it was real. "You refused to take my money last week because you thought I wasn't worth your time," Amara said, her voice calm but firm. "Now I'm not taking yours." Around them, customers and employees had started to gather. Murmurs spread through the store. The same people who had stood silent before were now watching justice unfold. Rick stammered. "You can't." "I can," Amara interrupted. "And I just did." For the first time, Rick looked truly powerless. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening, but there was nothing he could do. Amara turned to the employees. "For those who have been treated unfairly here, things are changing. Starting today, this is a store where everyone is welcome." A slow ripple of applause broke out. One of the cashiers grinned. A young man at the deli counter nodded approvingly. Even some customers clapped. Amara took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. She had fought back against injustice, not with anger alone, but with action. Rick grabbed his belongings and stormed out. His departure met with the satisfying sound of the door slamming behind him. A month later, the store had transformed. Employees smiled at customers. A community board had been set up for local businesses. Amara had even partnered with the cafe where she used to work to offer free coffee to seniors every morning. And most importantly, no one was ever turned away. One evening, as Amara locked up for the night, a familiar face appeared at the door. An elderly woman, the same one who had gasped at Rick's behavior that day, stood outside. "Miss Williams?" she said hesitantly. Amara opened the door. "Yes?" The woman stepped forward, her eyes glistening. "I was here that night. I saw what he did to you. I wanted to speak up, but I was afraid." She exhaled shakily. "But seeing what you didn't just fight back. You changed things. I just wanted to say thank you." Amara smiled, her chest tightening with emotion. "You're welcome," she said softly. As the woman walked away, Amara stood in the doorway, watching the streetlights flicker on. She had turned pain into power, injustice into justice. And this was just the beginning.